what would your advice be for step two? So now, let's say a young person wants to start their business and they want to get into real estate, and I'm gonna transport you back. See, today you are now 23 years old, right? In 2019, and you're gonna start and build your real estate empire. What would you do first this game? And
Well, see, I would. The difference today. First of all, I have the luxury, and I call it a luxury, of being brought up in Saskatchewan. Okay, where all the things you just mentioned, big car, big cigar, showing what you've done, is exactly the opposite of what happens in Saskatchewan. If you're successful, you don't want people to know it.
right,
Okay, so that's the first thing. Where you're in a bigger city,
that was the Rockefeller era, right? Back in the day.
yeah, that's right. So I consider that a blessing. Okay, I didn't have to fight with my ego. Um, just another point, before I get to what I do with the money you just gave me. I can remember in the 60s being in the basement of my shop on a Saturday night with my wife really mad at me because everybody else was going to the lake. And I said, well, I can't go. I have to get all these bills out for Monday.
Right.
And I think of that often because I remember some of the fellows that were going on this adventure. And they lived a rather frugal life. They squandered away a lot of opportunity that they could have had. And hey, they were happy with it, and I was happy with the decisions that I made. And my return came years later. I didn't realize that because I couldn't look into the future, So back to your question about money. You've got to create goods or services,
right,
to have value. So if I was given $10,000, what I would probably do is go out and buy some tools to be a carpenter, to be a painter, to be a cement finisher, and be the best one around and get a reputation for doing that. To be better than the next guy is you just got to be 10% better because it shows up
right,
in huge increments. So if you do what you say you're going to do, you do it well, you're reasonable in price, you'll get a reputation that you'll have more business than you can handle as one person. Now the rub comes. So you bring somebody else on to work with you, and your productivity gets cut in half. So you've got to work twice as hard and make sure the person that you've brought on
right,
is at least half as good as you are.
right.
So it's a bit of a cycle. And, I look at these people that build, like yourself, multi-million-dollar companies, and you attract people on a whole different mindset and a whole different part of their life, a whole different educational background. The people I work with, for the most part, are blue-collar workers, tradespeople. And I say that that's how I've built my wealth. I've just worked harder than them, longer than them, and I've done okay. But then I've been fortunate enough to bring people internally in the office that are way smarter than I am, that run the accounting, the other part of the business. So it's and there's a penalty, there's a price to be paid too. When I say that, when you're self-employed and you have those tools and the ability to do work, you got to take your watch off because you got to work when the work is there, and you have to work in order to make. And I tell people this: I made twice as much money as anybody else in my first year of business, but I worked 16 hours a day.
Right.
There's no magic to it.
No,
Just put your head down and worked.
And what's so funny is everything you said is relevant to, technology, to creative, like to my field, to so many others. Personally live under your means, right? Take debt seriously. Step two, to create real actual wealth, you have to be an owner in something, right? Whether it's
emotionally.
Emotionally,
Yeah.
but I would say even more importantly, in an actual business, right? So either you have stock or an equity or some stake in a business, and that's really important. for long-term wealth generation, right? Like income alone isn't sufficient in today. So I thought that was a good point. Number three is all about people. At the end of the day, the world is too complex. One human being, and I'm a big believer in that philosophy, one human being cannot solve all problems. The age of the Caesars and the Alexanders the Great are long gone. The world is way too complex. It's all about smart teams. So think special forces, right? Like that's what you want to think. A group of smart individuals, passionate, driven, and with a desire to succeed. So given that we have all those base fundamentals, right? Now you have an interesting team. You've got your $10,000. You're living under your means, and you're willing to work, 16 hours a day. What would you invest in?
Invest in. Okay, well, that's another good question. I'm very adverse to stocks. Okay, because I don't know anything about them, and not to say that's not a bad thing. I just go back to the only thing that you can do in Canada that has no tax consequences is to build your own home below market and sell it and take that capital tax-free and reinvest it in another home.
Can you talk about that? So build your own home?
Or buy a home and
Right.
renovate up. Take those tools that I bought for $10,000.
Right.
Okay? And make my house better than anybody else's house in that price range and put it on the market and sell it. And that uptick, the money you make, is tax-free. Okay? You can only do it about once every year and a half before Revenue Canada doesn't like it.
Right.
Not to say your wife's going to love that too. See, I know a friend
Honey,
of mine.
we're moving again.
Yeah. Well, hey, I know a friend of mine did it about a dozen times.
Wow.
And his wife had dug her heels in the last time and said, "We're never doing this again." Okay. And but the fact is, he's a fellow that I knew. We were 4 or 5 years old. He came from a family, a single mom,
Right.
4 kids, poor as church mice. Every one of the boys is extremely successful. And this fellow thinks out of the box, worked incredibly hard,
Right.
and grew his wealth initially by doing just what I suggested. Now, since then, because he's a very smart guy and thinking out of the box, he's done extremely well in real estate beyond that. So, I mean, that's the only thing that I know.
Right.
If you're a younger person who can come up with an app that is in demand today, that's another thing you could do. I mean, I know people that are going crazy over Bitcoin. Okay, I don't understand it. You and I talked a little bit about that,
yeah.
but you got to understand what you're doing. You got to have a deep understanding of it. If I get a hot tip on something, I know for sure I'm not the last person to get it, but probably the second last. You just don't
That's true.
stumble into those
Yeah,
things,
yeah.
So you've got to do your homework. You've got to have a gut feel. You've got to have some knowledge in the field.